let's officially start. Welcome everyone to this new meeting of the Milan seminar in the history of modern moral philosophy, the first meeting in the new year. So, by the way, a happy new year with 18th century moral philosophy to everyone. We are lucky enough, and I'm extremely pleased to have as our guest today Ruth Boeker, who is professor at University College Dublin, and by the way, PI of another ERC-funded project on 18th century moral philosophy. So, in a way, the closest colleague we have around at the moment, very close to our concerns and our aims. So she was not only an obvious choice to the first invitations in our seminar, but was especially nice and important to have her in connection with our endeavor or the Milan seminar, if only because she is really intensely working on 18th century moral philosophy. Her ERC-funded project is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's called Be Moral, New Histories, plural, of British moral philosophy in the 18th century. So she really belongs to the very core, she speaks to the very core of our interest in this seminar, which, as you know, is focused mainly on 18th century moral philosophy in basically all possible aspects. So, Ruth, we are extremely pleased to have you. Let me just recall the topic of your talk today, which is educational moral development in women's philosophical writings of the 18th century. We look forward to your talk, and many thanks again to be with us today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stefano, for his kind words, and thank you both to you and Michael for the invitation. It's a great honor to be able to present in this series, and it's great to see that kind of like 18th century philosophy is kind of like receiving kind of like renewed attention. Okay, so what I'm presenting here is work in progress, and I hope to kind of like really sketch kind of like areas for kind of like interesting new research, and hope that kind of like others will kind of like jump in and kind of like pick up on kind of like the ideas that I can only kind of like develop briefly here. So let me start. Although to the present day, studies on 18th century British moral philosophy continue to focus predominantly or exclusively on male philosophers, women actively participated in the moral debates of their day. For example, Damaris Masham, Mary Astle, Catherine Trotter Coburn, Susanna Newcomb, Catherine Macaulay, Mary Wollstonecraft, and others all wrote important works on moral philosophy. Several female philosophers, such as Damaris Masham, Mary Astle, Catherine Macaulay, Mary Wollstonecraft, and others, emphasize the importance of education for one's intellectual and moral development. In their view, education enables us to develop our moral agency. Instead of taking for granted that all human beings are fully developed moral agents, they draw attention to how one's social environment and how access to education can positively or negatively influence one's moral development. My focus in this talk will be on the role of education for moral development, because existing studies on moral philosophy of the early modern period have not yet paid sufficient attention to the role of education. Existing scholarship has often focused on metaethical issues or questions concerning the metaphysics of morality, and more attention can be paid to more practical questions. One of the questions that was of immediate practical concern for many thinkers of the 18th century was how they can develop and improve intellectually, socially, and spiritually to become better moral agents. Access to education was often seen as an important factor for enabling moral development and perfection. However, not everyone during this period had access to education. Many women during this period lacked access to more advanced education. Often, their education was rather basic and focused on domestic skills and feminine accomplishments, such as music, dancing, or sewing. Several 18th century women philosophers call out how lack of access to education is constraining their development and their ability to achieve happiness. Moreover, they draw attention to the social implications of excluding half of the population from adequate education and how all of humanity will benefit from improving education. Several works on education were published during the late 17th century and throughout the 18th century. I would like to begin by giving a brief survey of some of the works on education published during this period. John Locke's Some Thoughts Concerning Education provided inspiration for several subsequent treatises on education. Locke rejects educational practices that make use of corporeal punishment and instead recommends that educators invoke esteem and shame. His educational theory focuses on the development of both mind and body and emphasizes the importance of the cultivation of habits. Locke's educational program is meant to turn children into independent, rational, and moral beings. According to Locke, when children are young, they need parents who act as their governors, but as they grow older, the relationship between parents and their children should transform and be based on love and friendship. Locke was a resident at the Masham family estates in Oates for the last decade of his life. During this period, he was regularly engaged in philosophical conversation with Damaris Masham, who was the daughter of Cambridge Platonist philosopher Ralph Cudworth. Damaris Masham's son is said to have been brought up following the principles that Locke developed in his Some Thoughts Concerning Education. In 1705, Masham published occasionally thoughts in reference to a virtuous or Christian life. In this work, she emphasizes the importance of education and argues that education plays a crucial role in making people truly virtuous. Masham further criticizes how women often lack access to education. She writes, and this quote is on your handout, "For the information and improvement of the understanding by useful knowledge, a thing highly necessary to the right regulation of the manners is commonly very little thought of in reference to one whole sex, even by those who in regard of the other take due care hereof. But to this omission in respect of one sex, it is manifestly very much to be attributed that pains which is often bestowed upon the other does so frequently as it does prove ineffectual. Since the actual assistance of mothers will generally speaking be found necessary to the right forming of the minds of their children of both sexes, and the impressions received in that tender age, which is unavoidably much of it passed among women, are of exceeding consequence to men throughout the whole remainder of their lives, as having a strong and oftentimes unalterable influence upon their future inclinations and passions." Masham highlights that women in their role as mothers play a fundamental role in the upbringing of children. Thus, improving education will not only benefit them, but also the next generation and thereby humanity as a whole. Mary Astell is another philosopher who argued for the importance of women's education at the end of the 17th century and beginning of the 18th century. She was well aware of the challenges that women of her day faced and how social and economic circumstances made it difficult for women to devote time to study and intellectual, moral, and religious improvement. In part one of her series Proposal to the Ladies, Astor proposes her plan for an all-female academy that is meant to offer women a space for education and to support their moral and religious development. Part two of the same work offers practical guidance on how humans, and particularly women at home, can improve their minds. Astor believes that both men and women should have opportunities for improving their minds or souls. She writes, "For since God has given women as well as men intelligent souls, why should they be forbidden to improve them? Since he has not denied us the faculty of thinking, why should we not, at least in gratitude to him, employ our thoughts on himself, their noblest object, and not unworthily bestow them on trifles and gaieties and secular affairs?" Astor further develops her views on intellectual, moral, and religious development and the perfection in her later work, The Christian Religion, as professed by a daughter of the Church of England, which was first published in 1705. I will take a closer look at Astor's views on education and moral development in a moment. Let me mention further works on education in the Lockean tradition published during the second half of the 18th century. Catherine Macaulay's Letters on Education, first published in 1790, offered detailed recommendations for supporting the development of children at different ages. While Masham and Astle are concerned with addressing the deficiencies of women's education, which will indirectly benefit children, Macaulay's work has a different focus insofar as it presents a program for the upbringing of children throughout the different stages of their development. Her letters on education build on Locke's some thoughts concerning education and also critically engage with Rousseau's Emile. Macaulay believes that during the first 10 to 12 years, priority should be given to developing bodily strength, and only gradually should the focus shift towards the development of a child's intellectual capacities. One remarkable feature of Macaulay's view is that animals play an important role in her approach to education. Another distinctive feature of her work on education is that she recommends that students do not read the Bible until the age of 21, after they have had the opportunity to study numerous philosophical works on moral philosophy and metaphysics, including works by ancient philosophers as well as early modern authors such as Cudworth. Macaulay anticipates that her contemporaries will be surprised as to why she delays the study of scripture until that late. She believes that if students read the Bible at earlier ages, they will likely approach it with a skeptical attitude. After they've had the opportunity to engage with a broad range of philosophical works, Macaulay maintains that they will approach the Bible with an unbiased mind. And if they become Christians, which Macaulay expects they will, their faith will be grounded on the full conviction of their unbiased judgment. We'll take a closer look at Macaulay's educational program later during this talk. Now, I just want to briefly mention that Mary Wollstonecraft reviewed Macaulay's letter on education, and Wollstonecraft claimed that it influenced her own work. She published A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, and a few years earlier she published another work on education with the title Thoughts on the Education of Daughters, which is similar to Locke's title, kind of like Some Thoughts Concerning Education. After this brief survey of works on education, my plan now is to examine Astor's views on education and moral development more closely. Next, I want to briefly mention Catherine Trotter Coburn, another British 18th century moral philosopher. In contrast to the other female philosophers that I've mentioned so far, she did not develop a detailed view on education, but I believe it is worth reflecting on why she did not do so. And then I intend to take a closer look at Macaulay's views on education and moral development. So let us now take a closer look at Mary Astor's views on intellectual, moral, and spiritual development. Astor, like several of her contemporaries, regards morality and religion as particularly important for a well-lived human life. For Astor, morality is grounded in God's will, and thus the study of divine will and law will enable us to understand how we ought to act and allow us to improve and perfect ourselves. She believes that we should do all we can to improve our intellectual capacities and to improve and develop as moral agents. For Astor, this is significant not only to live well in this life, but it will also prepare us for the life to come. I will further show that moral development is not merely an individual project for Astor, but rather it has a social dimension. Astor regards humans as interconnected and argues that friends play an important role in our moral and religious development and improvement. I will say more about this in a moment. For now, let us turn to the practical recommendations that Astor offers that are meant to support our intellectual and moral development. Astor advises her readers to disengage from all former prejudices and to overcome ignorance, laziness, and idleness. She argues that we should be guided by truth and consider issues of dispute from all sides. Astor regards the improvement of our faculty to reason as particularly important, not only because it enables us to avoid prejudices and to detect truth, but also it is relevant for gaining knowledge of God's will. She writes that the business of our lives will be to improve our minds and to stretch our faculties to their utmost extent. Recommends the study of the Bible, which allows us to gain knowledge of God's will as it is revealed in Scripture. In Astor's view, reading and studying the Bible are best supplemented by practice, so that it becomes habitual for us to keep God's commandments. Additionally, Astor advises her readers to engage in meditation on our own nature, the nature of material bodies, and the nature of God. At first sight, Astor's approach to meditation seems similar to Descartes'. However, it is worth taking a closer look at the following passage, where Astor develops her own philosophical views concerning the relation between mind and body and human interconnectedness. And now I quote, "Now I know not any subjects more proper for our meditation on this and all occasions than our own nature, the nature of material beings and the nature of God. Because it is through the mistake of some of these that our inclinations take a wrong bias, and consequently that we transgress against God, our neighbor, and ourselves. For did we consider that human nature consists in the union of rational soul with a mortal body, that the body very often clogs the mind in its noblest operations, especially when indulged, that we stand not singly on our own bottom, but are united in some measure to all who bear a human form, especially to the community amongst whom we live, and yet more particularly to those several relations we may have in it." Astor not only acknowledges a union between soul and body, but also draws attention to how humans are interrelated and united and live in a social community. She further elaborates on this point in another passage. Again, when we consider that we are but several parts of one great whole and are by nature so connected to each other that whenever one part suffers, the rest must suffer with it, either by compassion or else by being punished for the want of it, we shall never be so absurd as to fancy we can do ourselves a service by anything injurious to our neighbors. This passage shows how Esther regards humans as part of a great whole. In her view, we are so strongly connected with others that the suffering of one part will affect others and lead to everyone else's participation in the suffering. The insight that we are all interconnected leads Esther to infer that harming or injuring others can never lead to any personal gain or advantage. I will return to her views on human connectedness later when I turn to the question of what role others play in our moral development. Before I do this, I would like to turn briefly to her views about the government of the passions. Although Esther shares the Cartesian view that mind and body are two distinct substances, she regards the mind or soul as superior to the body and argues that the mind should govern the body. Her metaphysical views concerning the relation between mind and body provide the basis for her view that we can govern the passion. According to Esther, it is not a fault to have passions. In her view, passions are natural and unavoidable and useful too. Rather, she believes that problems can arise if the passions take over and our mind fails to get mastery over them. For Esther, it is important that the soul makes use of her authority and governs and directs passions. One way passions can be governed is by directing a passion towards other objects. For example, if one has a desire for a sweet cake, one can direct that desire towards fruit instead, which would be a healthier option than eating the cake. Another option to govern passions is by replacing one passion with another passion. For example, someone who is in fear could aim to replace fear with hope. The discussion so far has shown how we as individuals are able to develop and improve our agency through study, regular practice, meditation, and self-government. Next, let us consider how, according to Astell, other human beings, and friends in particular, can support our moral development. For Astell, friendship is a special instance of charity, and it is helpful to clarify how she distinguishes friendship from general charity, especially since the meaning of the term charity has shifted since Astell's day. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the term charity often had religious or specifically Christian associations and was used to mean Christian love, which could have included God's love to humans, love of God and one's neighbors, as well as Christian love of fellow human beings. The term charity also had meanings without specific Christian associations and can refer to an attitude of loving kindness. Astell does not clearly define in what sense she understands charity, and we can assume that her readers would have been familiar with her use of the term. While some interpreters understand her notion of charity in terms of loving kindness, Astell's text also reveal more Christian resonances and suggest that charity for her is an expression of Christian love towards fellow human beings and involves benevolent acts towards one's neighbors. For example, she writes that it is our duty to worship God and to do acts of charity to mankind. She further states that it is much better that I should want some of the conveniences of life than that any of my neighbors should want the necessaries. This intimates that charity for us still focuses on ensuring that our neighbors have the necessities. Charity includes giving our neighbors material goods that they need, such as a coat if they lack one and we have a spare one, but also attending to their minds. She also points out that charity in its noblest form does not expect anything in return. According to Astell, our duty to our neighbor is not purely negative. It is not enough to do them no hurt, we must do them all the good we are able. So having introduced Astor's understanding of charity, let us consider how friendship differs from charity. While we are meant to care for the well-being of all our neighbors, friendship goes beyond general charity insofar as Astor believes that we should prioritize friends in our charity and be committed to supporting their perfection in the best possible way. She writes, "What remains to be done for a friend in particular? Nothing that I know of but to prefer him in our charity because we are best acquainted with his affairs, and which is the greatest of all charities, to watch over his soul and to promote his perfection to the utmost." Astle distinguishes friendship from flattery. While a flatterer merely tries to please another, a genuine friend is willing to offer kind advice and to guide another when they are at risk of being mistaken. In this vein, Astor writes that she takes friendship to consist in advising, admonishing, and reproving as there is occasion, and in watching over each other's souls for their mutual good. We find further evidence that Astor regards friendship as a reforming or bettering of the beloved in the following passage: "The truest effect of love being to endeavor the bettering of the beloved person, and therefore nothing is more likely to improve us in virtue and advance us to the very highest pitch of goodness than unfeigned friendship, which is the most beneficial as well as the most pleasant thing in the world." Astle is aware that even if one person intends to reform or better another person, this does not always lead to success. It is important that advice is properly given and received, which presupposes not only that the person who gives advice is skilled in communicating advice and knows the other well, but also that the person who is given advice is open to receiving it. Astor believes that when we intend to reform or better another, it is important that there is a probability of success. Astor's account of friendship shows how friends can play an important role in supporting one's personal and moral development, and how improvement becomes a social or interpersonal project. Astor's plan for an all-female academy or retreat for women that she outlines in part 1 of her series proposal sheds further light on how a community can advance one's personal, moral, and religious development. Astor's retreat is meant to provide a space for women that allows them to step out of busy daily life and to gain a moral and religious education. In this environment, they can overcome prejudices and counteract bad customs. According to Astor, ignorance and narrow education lay the foundation of vice, and imitation and custom reared up. Many women of Astor's day grew up and lived in social settings where women were primarily seen as objects of beauty, like tulips in a garden, and lacked access to proper education and opportunities for developing their minds. The all-female academy that Astor envisaged was not merely an institution where women could get access to education, but was also a community where friendships could be developed and flourish. As Astor writes, that institution both disposes us to be friends ourselves and helps to find them. Indeed, she believes that it offers the opportunity of contracting the purest and noblest friendship. Having opportunities to foster friendships is important for our moral development, since Astor regards friendship as a particularly important virtue. She writes, "For friendship is a virtue which comprehends all the rest, none being fit for this who is not adorned with every other virtue." Probably one considerable cause of the degeneracy of the present age is connect the little true friendship that is to be found in it. Or perhaps you will rather say that this is the effect of our corruption. The cause and the effect are indeed reciprocal, for were the world better, there would be more friendship, and were there more friendship, we should have a better world. Friends in Astor's sense are committed to a shared moral and religious project. They are committed to supporting each other and to contribute to the other's perfection. The discussion of Astor's views has shown that personal and moral development and perfection is not merely an individual project for Astor, but also involves friends who are committed to offering honest advice, to helping us perfect ourselves, and who will remind us of God's will when appropriate. Friends play an important role in Astor's moral philosophy. Friendship is an illustration of how interconnected humans are and how humans can realize moral perfection if they're willing to embrace their interconnectedness. So far, I've highlighted works by women philosophers of the late 17th and 18th century that emphasize the importance of education. I would like to briefly pause this discussion by turning to the philosophy of Catherine Trotter Coburn. Coburn was an active philosophical writer during the first half of the 18th century. In contrast to several other women of the 18th century, she did not develop detailed views on the importance of education. She wrote a short essay on the usefulness of schools and universities, which comments on the advantages of education. Apart from this, Coburn did not publish a work on education, yet she was actively engaged in the upbringing of her 4 children, and her correspondence provides insights into how committed she was to the education of her children. The fact that Coburn does not emphasize the importance of education in the way several of her female contemporaries did makes it worth asking why she did not see the need to press this issue. Although this is speculative, I believe that her moral philosophy gives us some hints. She pushes back against Thomas Rutherford's moral theory, who argues that morality presupposes guidance and education. Contrary to Rutherford, Coburn argues that we do not need a guide to teach us what our happiness and what our duty is. She acknowledges that it can be useful and advantageous to have an infallible guide who can teach us what actions we should choose and to which ends they lead. However, she points out that not everyone is in a position to turn to a guide. Some people, perhaps due to unfortunate circumstances, may live in parts of the world where nobody is around who can teach them how to improve morally. Circumstances, Coburn argues we have to rely on our own nature and figure out what is best to do by reflecting on human nature. In her view, nature and reason provide a sufficient guide and can teach us what our happiness and duty is. Coburn argues that morality is grounded in human nature and that we can come to understand how we ought to act by reflecting on what is fitting or suitable for humans with such natures to do. This does not presuppose education and is something that everyone who properly reflects is able to understand. I presume that her view that morality is accessible to everyone explains why education does not play a prominent role in her philosophical writings. I'm now turning to Catherine Macaulay, who developed a detailed theory of education in her letters on education, which were first published in 1790. Macaulay emphasizes the importance of education and argues that human character is formed from the influence of education. While we have various capacities as part of our human constitutions, these will need to be cultivated and developed. Macaulay believes that practice and education allow us to develop our human faculties from mere capacity to an excellence and an energy which enables us to become the carvers of our own happiness. In her view, we are neither naturally virtuous nor vicious beings, but rather good education is crucial for realizing our moral potential and achieving happiness. Macaulay is critical of other systems of education and distances herself from approaches to education that do not clearly distinguish moral principles from laws and customs of society. In her view, morality is based on immutable moral principles rather than on changing social norms and customs. Because Macaulay believes that there's moral truth, or as she also puts it, that there's an immutable basis of morality, it is so important in her view that children acquire the right habits that enable them to be virtuous. She writes, in order to take from public sentiment a reproach which leaves a deep stain on the human character, and to correct many irregularities and even enormities which arise from incorrect systems of ethics, it ought to be the first care of education to teach virtue on immutable principles, and to avoid that confusion which must arise from confounding the laws of customs of society with those obligations which are founded on correct principles of equity. While Macaulay argues that it is important that morality is based on the right principles, she is also very clear that education should be age appropriate for children, and she argues that it is better to teach young children by example than to confront them with precepts that they cannot yet properly comprehend. Like Astle and other philosophers of the early modern period, she argues that we must free ourselves from prejudices. She writes, to read virtue right, we must divest ourselves of all partialities and prejudices, and to divest oneself of all partialities and prejudices is the task which perhaps has never been thoroughly accomplished by any man. However, to preserve as much as possible the independence of the mind, let us be very sparing of the precept to the credulous years of infancy. Let us devote the first 10 or 12 years of life by strengthening of the corporeal faculties to the giving of useful habits, and to those attainments which can be acquired without burdening the mind with ideas which it cannot well comprehend. Here we see how important it is for Macaulay that education is age appropriate. During early years, their upbringing is meant to strengthen their bodily abilities, and the focus should be on acquiring right habits. She cautions about not overwhelming young children intellectually, and to avoid using concepts that they are not yet able to comprehend properly. She believes that children learn best by example, and advises parents to examine their own character so that they can lead by example when they instill habits in their children. In Macaulay's view, children do not only learn from their parents, guardians, and other human beings, but also from interaction with animals. This is a unique feature of her philosophy of education. She writes, I would therefore indulge my pupils in the keeping as many animals as they can properly attend. It will give them the practice of benevolence. It will serve as an agreeable and innocent amusement, and by the knowledge they will thus acquire of brute nature, they will be cured of prejudices founded on ignorance and in the vanity and conceit of man. Macaulay recognizes that by interacting with animals, we can develop our sensibilities and become more benevolent beings. Benevolence plays a central role in Macaulay's moral philosophy. Indeed, she claims that the virtue of benevolence is of so comprehensive a nature that it contains the principles of every moral duty. To say more on Macaulay's views on animals, she rejects unnecessary cruelty towards animals. She investigates why some humans are willing to inflict suffering on animals while others are sensible to the pain of animals. In her view, the difference between those that feel with animals and those that are indifferent towards the suffering of animals has to do with their upbringing and education. She emphasizes the importance of cultivating sympathy because sympathy allows us to partake in the feelings of fellow creatures, which for her include non-human animals. And I'm now kind of coming to the end and just kind of rounding up the discussion so far. So in this paper, I have shown how several women philosophers of the 18th century argue for the importance of education. While some argue specifically that women deserve better access to education so that they can improve and perfect their moral agency, others develop a program of education for young children so that children during their formative years can develop right habits that will allow them to live virtuously and attain happiness. I believe it is worth paying more attention to works on education because getting access to good education was an important practical concern for many thinkers during the 18th century. Education and the related questions of how we can develop and improve intellectually, morally, and spiritually are of immediate practical importance for how we can achieve moral perfection and happiness. By paying closer attention to early modern views on education, we can also discover further themes that have not yet received detailed attention in studies on British moral philosophy, such as friendship or moral issues concerning non-human animals, which can prompt further studies on human sociability and interconnectedness, as well as our connection with other creatures, such as animals. I hope that these issues will find more consideration in future studies on early modern moral philosophy. Thank you very much.